People who have been following my videos will know that I have made some educated guesses on how SpaceX will solve the radiation hazard and get people to Mars for only $500,000 per person. Originally in 2012, I predicted that a Falcon 20 would lift the Dragon spacecraft, a living quarters module, and a radiation shelter module surrounded by 2 meters of water. And a second Falcon 20, with 2 additional first stages as side boosters, would lift the Earth departure stage with all the propellant for the mission. In 2014, when Musk announced that he planned on taking 100 people per trip, I revised my educated guesses accordingly. Because of all the attempts that Musk has put into achieving propulsive landings with the Falcon 9 and Dragon, I theorize that his proposed Mars Colonial Transport System would be a Red Dragon equivalent to the Big Gemini or manned orbiting laboratory. Such a Mars flight would still require an Earth orbit rendezvous approach. Originally, Musk said he planned on unveiling his Mars strategy in late 2012 or early 2013.
And you're going to unveil this later this year, are you? This strategy?
I think either later this year or early next.
But this unveiling was pushed to September 2016. Since 2014, I've suspected the reason the unveiling was delayed was because Musk first wanted to establish propulsive landings with the Falcon 9 before unveiling a manned equivalent capable of propulsive landings. Well, as of the release of this video, the Falcon 9 has had 2 successful land landings and 4 successful ocean barge landings. The time to unveil the strategy was perfect. In late September, Elon Musk announced on his Twitter account that he would unveil his Mars Colonial Transporter, now the Interplanetary Transport System, at the International Astronomical Congress in Mexico.
So those are the four elements that need to be achieved. Whatever system is designed, whether by SpaceX or anyone, we think these are the 4 features that need to be addressed in order for the system to really achieve a low cost per ton to the surface of Mars. And this is a simulation of the overall system. So what you saw there is really quite close to what we will actually build. It will look almost exactly what you saw, like what you saw. So this is not an artist's impression. These the simulation was actually made from the SpaceX engineering CAD models. So this is not, it's not just, well, this is what it might look like. This is what we plan to try to make it look like.
It turns out my predictions about a Dragon equivalent to the manned orbiting laboratory was correct. Looking at this design, the nose of the MCT looks very similar to that of a Dragon version 2, but with an enormous aft section housing the cargo propellant and engines. The rocket itself was also a sight to behold. While he never referred to it as a Falcon 20, his proposed rocket is very similar in size to the Saturn V and has a lifting capacity of 550 tons. This is comparable to what I had estimated for the Falcon 20 Heavy. Well, if just one of these cores could lift 550 tons to Earth orbit, with 2 additional first stages as side boosters, it could lift over 1,600 tons. What was originally proposed for the Falcon 20 and what was unveiled is drastically different. For one thing, the original design indicated that it was a 2-stage rocket with 6 or 9 engines. Now, it is a 1-stage rocket with 42 engines. The Earth departure stage and the lander's descent and ascent engines appear to have been incorporated into one body. Musk proposes launching the MCT into orbit with one of these big rockets, followed by a series of tanker launches to fill up the MCT's propellant tanks. This is indeed an Earth orbit rendezvous as I had theorized. Only, instead of bringing up an Earth departure stage to dock with the manned vehicle, it is just bringing up the propellant. When I first saw this video, I lit up with excitement. I felt my predictions and educated guesses were so close enough to what Musk was proposing that I felt vindicated. But as I watched further into the video, and the cutaways of the MCT started to appear in his lecture slides, there was that nagging question. Where's the shelter? It doesn't appear anywhere in these diagrams. Even in the virtual tour, it doesn't appear anywhere. And the alarm bells quickly went off in my head when Musk's lecture moved on to the topic of exploring the moons of Jupiter and Saturn.
So then what about beyond Mars? So as we thought about the system, and the reason we call it a system, because generally I don't like calling things systems because everything's a system, including your dog, is that it's actually more than a vehicle. There's obviously the rocket booster, the spaceship, the tanker, and the propellant plant, the in situ propellant production. If you have all of those 4 elements, you can actually go anywhere in the solar system by planet hopping or moon hopping. So by establishing a propellant depot in the asteroid belt or on one of the moons of Jupiter, you can make flights from Mars to Jupiter no problem. In fact, even without a propellant depot at Mars, you can do a flyby of Jupiter without a propellant depot. But by establishing a propellant depot, let's say Enceladus or Europa or any of there's a few options, and then doing another one on Titan, Saturn's moon, and then perhaps another one further out on Pluto or elsewhere in the solar system. This system really gives you freedom to go anywhere you want in the greater solar system. So you can actually travel out to the Kuiper Belt, to the Oort cloud. I wouldn't recommend this for interstellar journeys, but this basic system, provided we have filling stations along the way, means full access to the entire greater solar system. It would be really great to do a mission to Europa, particularly.
So I don't know, should I just throw this on
Musk did not mention radiation anywhere in his speech. Only during the Q&A session, when a member of the audience raised this concern, did he say anything about radiation.
Hi, Elon. Lauren Grush from The Verge. You talk about how the Mars colonization architecture is meant to serve as a backup plan.
Man, there's so many mics here.
Yeah, if you can see me.
Okay.
The Mars architecture is supposed to serve as a backup plan for humanity, but you didn't touch much on how you will keep humans safe on the way over there from either deep space radiation or how they will live on the planet. Can you give us some insight into the life support systems, habitats, stuff like that?
Sure. I mean, my view on the radiation thing is that there's certainly some risk of radiation, but it's not deadly. There'll be some slight increased risk of cancer, but it's I think relatively minor. You need to have some shielding, particularly if there's a solar flare or sort of a big any kind of sort of solar storm. We'd want to basically point the rocket at the sun and maximize your shielding effect. Point the rear of the rocket at the sun so you maximize your shielding effect and have the passengers cluster around a column of water. But I think the radiation risk there is relatively small. Once you're on Mars, obviously you cut your radiation in half just because you've got the planet shielding you, and then there's at least some atmosphere. And I think then what you could construct over time is an artificial magnetic field to deflect high-energy particles. So I actually think the radiation thing is it's often brought up, but I think it's not too big of a deal.
I had hoped that after all my videos on this subject, that Musk had got the message and realised his column of water was not going to work, but sadly, it seems my attempts to reach him have failed. He still thinks only a column of water pointed to the sun will be sufficient to protect the astronauts against the radiation. You need to shelter all sides of the capsule, because the solar flares are deflected in all directions by the sun's magnetic field. For example, on January 27, 2012, a solar flare erupted from the sun in the direction pointed away from both the Earth and Mars. But the solar particles ended up reaching both of these planets anyway, as they fell along the sun's magnetic field lines in that direction. These particles were also detected by both Stereo B, a near-Earth satellite, and the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. Clearly, simply pointing the bulky side of the ship towards the sun isn't going to cut it. Solar flares are not directional. It is important to note that I brought this very flare to Elon Musk's attention back in 2012. He stopped talking about his column of water after that, which led me to suspect that he saw the flaw in his plan. But alas, my warnings seem to have fallen on deaf ears. One option to provide shelter from all directions would be to build a small capsule inside the propellant tanks so the crew could transfer to this makeshift shelter during a solar flare, with the obvious bonus that it would keep the mass down. But what happens when the propellant runs out? Clearly, the only practical option is to have a shelter with 2 meters of water around it. And on the surface of Mars itself, you don't have any protection. On Earth, we are shielded from radiation because we have a strong magnetic field that deflects and captures most of the radiation, and also a dense atmosphere that provides the equivalent of 10 meters of water shielding. Mars has no magnetic field, and its atmosphere is thin enough to be considered a vacuum. Even the group at Mars 1 proposed burying their habitat under tons of Mars soil for protection, and those idiots thought only 25 grams per square centimeter of shielding was enough for the trip. No, you need an isotropically shielded capsule rated at 200 grams per square centimeter. But perhaps the biggest indication that Musk doesn't have a clue what he's getting himself into, solidification that he has greatly underestimated the hazard, is illustrated in this particular slide. Here, we see an artist's rendition of his MCT on Jupiter's moon Europa with astronauts walking around outside it. Do I really need to tell you what's wrong with this picture? Europa lives in Jupiter's radiation belt. Readings from Pioneer 10 alone showed that at the vicinity of Europa, there are 40 MeV electrons at a flux of 12,000 particles per square centimeter per second. So we have our 12,000 electrons per square centimeter per second. First, we convert to electrons per square meter per hour by multiplying that by 100 squared square centimeters and 3,600 seconds per hour. We cancel the square centimeters and the seconds, and we get nearly half of 1 trillion electrons per square meter per hour. To find out how many of these electrons will strike the astronaut, we multiply it by the surface area of a human. we find he would be hit by about 0.9 trillion electrons every hour, each packing 40 mega-electron-volts of energy, meaning that he would absorb over 35 trillion mega-electron-volts of energy every hour. 1 MeV is equal to 1.6 by 10 to the minus 13 joules, so this gives us 5.5 joules per hour. To convert this to Gray radiation units, we divide it by the body mass of a human, which averages 75 kilograms. This gives us 0.074 Gray per hour, and we can further convert this to rads by multiplying by 100. This gives us 7 rads per hour. It is important to note that a 40 MeV electron can penetrate about 22 grams per square centimetre of aluminium, and a spacesuit, meanwhile, has only 0.25 grams per square centimetre. This leads to the inescapable conclusion that an astronaut walking around on Europa would be vulnerable to these electrons. 7 rads per hour may not sound like much, but we're not done yet. Data from Pioneer 10 also showed that at the orbit of Europa, the fluxes of 3 MeV electrons are about 35 million particles per square centimetre per second, and the 30 MeV proton fluxes are on the order of 1,000 particles per square centimetre per second. 3 MeV electrons need about 1.6 grams per square centimetre of material to stop them, and 30 MeV protons require about 70 grams per square centimetre of shielding. These two will also pass right through the spacesuit. The high-energy protons and electrons will probably also pass through the MCT itself. By comparison, the International Space Station's thickest module is rated at 15 grams per square centimetre. So we plug the new values for flux and energy into the formula and repeat the calculations as before. And for 3 MeV electrons, it gives us an astonishing 1613 rads per hour. For protons, we again repeat the calculations with the new values of flux and energy. But there is another step we need to do. We need to convert this from the absorbed dose to the equivalent dose by multiplying it by the appropriate Q factor. For electrons, the Q factor is 1, so the absorbed dose is always equal to the equivalent dose. Protons, however, have a range of Q factors. Above 2 MeV, the range is between 2 and 5. I've seen much higher Q factors mentioned elsewhere. John Malden, for example, used a Q factor of 10 for 10 MeV protons and neutrons. But I'm sticking with 5, since a Q factor of 5 is most consistent with E. Kovalev's estimated dose for his selection of 30 MeV proton events. And so for the 30 MeV protons on Europa, we get a dose of about 2.3 rads per hour. The total dose rate ends up being the sum of these doses we calculated. And we get a total of approximately 1623 rads per hour, with the majority of these from the 3 MeV electrons. Keep in mind that 500 rad in any short time is considered lethal. From this simple calculation, we find astronauts walking around on Europa would have received a lethal dose of radiation within minutes. Of course, 3 MeV electrons are readily shielded by about 6.1 millimeters of aluminium, so you might think that you're safer inside the MCT. Think again. We already established that 30 MeV protons and 40 MeV electrons require a substantial amount of more shielding. The sum of the dose rates from these particles is close to 10 rads per hour. That means within 1 Earth day spent inside the MCT, you'll have received over 230 rads. You'd be dead within days. And even though you've blocked out the 3 MeV electrons, you haven't seen the last of them. Because as the electrons are stopped in material, they lose energy in the form of bremsstrahlung, secondary X-ray photons that require an inner shield of high-Z material, like lead or gold, to attenuate them. The fraction of energy that an electron will lose as an X-ray photon is given by the formula F equals kZe, where K is 7 by 10 to the minus 4 per mega electron volt, Z is the atomic number of the outer shield attenuating the electrons, and E is the energy of the original electrons. We already know E, so we'll assume the outer shield is aluminium, which gives us Z equals 13. So we plug in those numbers, cancel the units, and we are left with the fraction 0.0273. To find the energy of the X-ray photons, we multiply this fraction by the original energy of the electrons. This gives us 82 kilo electron volts. This puts them in the range of hard X-rays. Now that we know the energy of the electrons, we repeat the calculations as before, this time in terms of photons rather than particles. and when we do that, we get a dose rate of about 44 rads per hour. When we add this secondary X-ray dose to the primary proton and electron doses, we find the total dose is now about 54 rads per hour. In just 24 hours, you'd have absorbed nearly 1300 rads. Clearly, we see that on the surface of Europa, inside the MCT, you'd be dead within less than 10 hours, and outside the MCT, you'd be dead in minutes. Musk would be better served sending his MCT to Callisto, which resides outside of Jupiter's radiation belt, but even so, his ship would still need a shelter. It should be clear that, as it is now, the Mars Colonial Transporter is dead in the water. However, the big rocket he's proposing still has potential. It could send about 183 tons to the Moon and 137 tons to Mars. A Dragon docked with a habitat module similar to the Kibo laboratory and a shelter module surrounded by 2 meters of water would have a mass of 131 tons, 109 tons for the water alone. On the other hand, you could replace this solid cylindrical habitat with a Bigelow Aerospace BA-330 inflatable habitat, giving the crew extra living room. Now the stack is 135 tons. This falls perfectly within the Falcon 20's payload to the Moon and Mars. With 2 first stages as side boosters, this rocket would probably be able to lift 1,650 tons to Earth orbit. This would be 550 tons to the Moon, and about 413 tons to Mars. Of course, this will all depend on the success of the gigantic Falcon rocket with 42 engines. By comparison, the Soviet Union's N-1 rocket had 30 engines in the first stage alone. 4 launches of this rocket were made, and each test turned into a disaster. On the 4th launch, an engine anomaly occurred just 10 seconds prior to the first stage separation. It was established that had the first stage been shut down and the second stage ignited prematurely, the launch might have been saved. An improved version of the N-1, known as the N-1F, was scheduled for launch in 1974. It is believed this launch would have been successful as all the flaws with the previous model had been ironed out. But the program was cancelled before launch, and the potential of this new design was never realised. Maybe SpaceX has taken a few leaps out of the N-1F's book to ensure stability. In conclusion, I ultimately made some reasonably accurate predictions on how SpaceX plans on sending 100 people to Mars per trip. But my prediction on how they plan to solve the radiation problem on such a trip was way off, because it turns out they haven't even attempted to solve it at all. The dangerously accepted position is to just assume that the radiation is a non-issue. I have no doubt that, as it is now, the Mars Colonial Transporter, or Interplanetary Transport System, whatever you want to call it, is destined to fail. And SpaceX stands in jeopardy of losing 100 people to space radiation. Sending colonies to Mars, and certainly Europa, is way off. But if the Falcon 20, with its 42 engines, proves feasible, manned Red Dragon missions could become a reality.
The magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Little Jackie Paper laughed at Rascal Puff and bought him strings and sealing wax and other fancy stuff. Oh, Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu.
Together they would travel on a boat with billowed sail. Jackie kept a lookout perched on Puff's gigantic tail. Noble kings and princes would bow whene'er they came. Pirate ships would lower their flags when Puff roared out his name. Oh,
Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the
Adults live forever, but not so little boys. Ancient rings and giant wings make way for other toys. Then one grey night it happened, Jackie Paper came no more. And Puff, that mighty dragon, he ceased his fearless roar.
We'd want to basically point the rocket at the sun and maximize your shielding effect. You point the rear of the rocket at the sun, so you maximize your shielding effect.
I told you that's not going to work.
Cluster around it with a column of water. But I think the radiation risk there is relatively small.
So Puff, that mighty dragon, sadly slipped into his cave.